We're going to see that the Chinese consumer will change China, it will change the world, and it will probably, or could, be a growth driver strong enough to carry the world economy out of some of the problems that it's experiencing right now, especially in emerging markets.
The Chinese consumer story is, we would say, the most important consumer story on the planet right now. Our GDP forecast for this year is that GDP is going to come in just above 7%. Now, obviously, looking at that from London, 7% sounds pretty good. But in a country that's been growing at or close to double digits for the best part of the past decade, 7% obviously is a significant slowdown and has led some to worry about the knock-on effect on the Chinese consumer story. But my first message, based on our sort of survey on the ground research, really is that Chinese consumers are kind of shrugging it off. They remain confident. They're continuing to spend freely. While clearly the short-term impact has been negative, actually in some ways we think in the long term this drive could help to push some of these brands onto a more sustainable and more genuine long-term footing. So we expect Chinese travellers to make around 112 million overseas trips in 2014, up from 97 million in 2013. So every single one of our respondents, this is a question on the right, went shopping on their most recent overseas trip, spending over 12,000 renminbi, or that's around £1,200 on average on their most recent trip. So that accounts for around 43% of their total spending, which is enormous. I mean, that's more than 3 times the amount spent on accommodation, on transportation, on food, on entertainment. So as you can see, foreign brands dominate many sectors, and a number of these brands are in fact brands that have been subject to either government or state media-led scrutiny or attacks over the past 18 months to 2 years. So it sort of goes to show that if you read that a foreign brand has been embroiled in sort of negative publicity in China, it doesn't necessarily spell disaster. It really depends on what it is. Actually, what we see is that there are shifting consumer trends, shifting consumer tastes, and in a lot of cases, slowing sales are due to the fact that companies perhaps aren't necessarily adapting to them quickly enough, as much as, I think that what you might hear from a number of foreign companies is that kind of blaming the government. I think that there is clearly greater scrutiny, but it's not to say that that's the cause for all of the problems that foreign companies may have in China. I mean, Chinese consumers are relatively cynical, but they're also relatively forgiving, and there's an element to which, to some extent, people don't seem particularly surprised often when there are revelations that particular companies have been, have done something slightly untoward, and so as a result, it's almost kind of thinking, well, okay, who's next? Rather than that one specific company being the only company that's been up to no good. It's kind of a sense that a lot of companies are up to no good, and therefore, in a weird sort of way, that means that it's easier to forgive.
Many Chinese travelers, before they go abroad, they not only have a big shopping list of what they want to buy and what their friends want them to buy for them, they also have planned in advance where they're going to buy whatever it is that they plan to buy. And apparently this is very detailed. So it would be right down to the detail, I'm going to buy that in Bond Street and I'm going to buy that at Heathrow.
I want to go to stores where I can just pay directly with my Chinese bank card. Actually, the commission rates are pretty low. So again, I would say that for larger retailers, having the ability to let Chinese customers pay directly with their UnionPay cards is another big. This sort of new generation of migrant workers have very different behavior from their sort of previous generations. So whereas previous generations tended to send their money home, would only stay, let's say, in the factories in coastal cities for a few years and then move back home. The new generation very much see themselves as wanting to settle down in the cities and also are increasingly spending what they earn rather than sending it home. Blue-collar wages have grown at double-digit rates for the best part of the last kind of 2 decades, and that's continuing to happen. So there's greater wealth, there's a greater propensity to spend. Rural land has been unable to be traded or sold on. What we're seeing on this front is increasing moves to create a genuine rural land market. Now again, this is gradual, again, it can't happen overnight. But as and when this happens, that really will be potentially a real game changer in terms of unlocking a lot more wealth.